Hello, my name is Natalie and welcome to my YouTube channel Knitting-a-GoGo. I've created this channel because I want to show the process of when I work through my love of knitting vintage 1960s and 70s knitting patterns. I just thought it would be a fun thing to sort of document the process and something you might be interested in, and you might pick up some tips along the way of how to work from vintage knitting patterns. So the first video, this video that I'm going to be showing you, is a knitting pattern that was created by very famous designer in the 1960s, Mary Quant. Hence I'm fortunate to own some Quant-foot boots and a bag. And she was very much at the forefront with new designs that were quite youthful and fun in the 1960s, and very part of the mod sort of culture with the dress and the way women dressed with these cool little boots and everything as well. So since I was a teenager, I've collected quite a few of the Mary Quant knitting patterns from when I first discovered them back in a charity shop where I used to live in Kent. Since then, I've managed to accumulate quite a few, as you can see from this collection here. So I wanted to knit one of these patterns for the channel to show you my process of working through them. And the one I've actually picked today is right behind me, which is this top here, which is the original pattern. I try and keep them all stored lovely and immaculate. This one was already creased when I bought it some time ago. And it's a simple sleeveless top. And you may wonder why, out of all the patterns I've potentially got, some are a bit more, you know, like dresses and things that she designed, why I've picked this one. And the main reason being is that I actually managed to source on eBay some actual vintage wool that this pattern requires in the exact quantity I need, which was the Patons Flair with Cortel, as you can see here. What was great about it was the fact that, well, I just thought it'd be really interesting to actually knit this pattern in the original wool that I managed to source, as you can see here. We're really fortunate now with knitting patterns in this day and age. You normally get a big variety of sizes, and it's great, you know, it caters for everyone, which is brilliant. But back then, they were very limited with the sizes, and so a lot of these patterns that Mary Quant released in collaboration with the different knitting companies, they only ever designed for 3 sizes mainly. And this one is a prime example of that, because it's a 34, 36 and 38 inch bust, and there's no other, you know, sizes. It's very limited. For this particular one, I was going to make the 34 inch bust, and for that I needed a total of 12 ounces of the Patons Flair. So each ball is 1 ounce of this. Each one is 1 ounce. So where I found this for sale, it actually I found a total of 12 exactly. So I'm hoping when I create this that there is enough and I don't run out. And I will be talking through the process and the knitting of the top and what I'm making, and show me making it as well. Yeah, so I'm really excited to be working on this with the original wool. It's quite a thick wool. It is 60% wool and 40% Cortel, which is kind of like back in the 60s, these sort of acrylic style wools were becoming very man-made wools. Well, not even wool, you know, man-made fibres. They were becoming very popular because you could just throw them in the washing machine, wash them over and over. Whereas wool potentially takes a bit more care and attention to washing, and everything just wanted to be quick, simple back then. It was getting more that way with the fashion, with how things were made, and knitting was very much becoming a part of that as well. So it feels slightly scratchy because it's got wool in there. It's not the smoothest of like some of the wools you get now, but you know, it will be interesting to see how it knits up. And it's not a double knit weight. I would say it says triple knit in here, made in Great Britain by Patons and Baldwins Limited, who used to be a knitwear company. And I would say it is definitely more like an Aran weight. So it's going to be quite a thick jumper, I think, when it's made, or top. And obviously I couldn't find the original colour. I mean, I felt really lucky to have even found this in the exact quantity I needed for this pattern. But it's a lovely burgundy, and I've got an idea for, I've got a pair of trousers, vintage cords, that are quite 60s in style, that I think this colour will go really well with and worn together. So it's going to be a perfect addition to my wardrobe, really, I think. So maybe it might go quite well with some of these Quant foot boots, which are from 1967. And I've even got an original, something else I collected when I was younger. One of these really cool bags as well that came with a box as well. So, yeah, so I hope you enjoy the video and the making of this original vintage 60s top from this pattern. So here's a close-up of the Mary Quant pattern in more detail, where you can see it says to use this Patons Flair with Cortel, which, as I mentioned earlier, I was really fortunate to be able to get some of that from there. And I've got the right quantity of the balls I require as well, which is 12 ounces, so 12 balls. And as you can see, it's quite a thicker yarn, 60% wool, 40% Cortel, and as I said, in 1 ounce balls. So like I said, it's more like an Aran weight kind of wool, but it's a really nice burgundy colour that I actually really like. And it's a colour I like to wear, which is great. But I love looking at these old vintage ball bands. I think they're great. So this is my poor pattern that's a bit, it's not in the best of condition, unfortunately. But I really like this where it says this is a Mary Quant design, one of the collection created exclusively for Patons Flair with Cortel. Mary Quant, famous as a pace setter in the fashion world, has now brought her originality and flair to her knitting. She has added supreme practicality to her designs by choosing to interpret them in a blend of wool and Cortel, so they are easy to knit, super soft, and wash, wear and keep their shape beautifully. Now here are the needles, which are the UK's old British size needles, which are a 3mm and a 375mm. So the needles I've chosen for this particular knit is some Knit Pro Zing needles, which are circular needles, and that I really like the metal on them and the nice sharp tip they also have in these sizes that I require. I like knitting with circular needles because I find when knitting garments, it just sits nicely in the lap and it's not so much strain on your arms and hands if you had like a long needle to hold it on, like the weight of it, especially if it's a thicker knit as well. So yeah, this is the packet these Knit Pro Zing needles come in, and yeah, there's just some writing on the back just showing you the qualities of what they are. And as I said before, they've got this nice sort of tip on them, which I find that goes through the stitches quite nicely. So as I said, this particular pattern's quite creased, unfortunately. It's just a little flick through there of it. What I like to do before I start knitting is I actually photocopy the pattern just for personal use for me. It's just so I can make my own markups on it and my personal notes without, these patterns are quite rare and I don't want to ruin it any more than it's kind of already is at the moment with its creases. So I like to be able to just, also when I'm travelling, I travel a lot with my knitting, so I like to take a photocopy with me rather than the original pattern to keep it again as pristine as I possibly can in its current condition. So what I then next do, once I've marked off my needle sizes for the modern needles, the 3mm and the 375, I look at the bust size I want to make. So as I showed you there, it's the 34 bust that I'll be making of this pattern. So I get my highlighter pen and I just literally highlight the numbers that are relevant to my size that I'm going to be making. I then just tend to highlight them as much as I can. So I'm literally just going through the whole pattern and highlighting the stitches for my size and every bit of information in relation to my size. I just find it really helpful for when I'm working through it, when I'm glancing at the pattern. I like to knit in front of the television and things, and with the highlight it just makes sure that I definitely am knitting to the correct size and I don't accidentally look at the wrong measurement next to it or something, and then I have to spend time frogging the knitting, and by frogging I mean I'm picking the rows depending how far you've gone before you realise your mistake. And that can be time consuming. So once I've done that, like I said, I can put this other pattern back safely, and then I can just continue using the pattern I have. The next thing I do before I even knit the garment is I check my tension. It's very important to check your tension before you start, because you could knit it completely the wrong size if your tension square isn't right. I mean, it helps that I've got the original wool, so hopefully when I knit this tension square and measure it, it's going to measure how I'd like. I tend to do a garter stitch border and also 3 garter stitches on the side, as you saw there, just to keep it flatter when I'm measuring. And then I'm using this ruler here, which is designed for measuring tensions on your knitting, because it's got a 4 inch and 10 centimetre line across the clear part of the ruler, which means you can see your knitting underneath. Like here on this table, you can see it's pink, it's all see-through, and you can see the pink underneath, which is again the same what you can with your stitches. And you can also use a tape measure as well, so if you don't have like a ruler like that, tape measures are perfectly fine, just to measure what you need to on your tension square, and using some pins. So for this one, I'm just going to actually use the ruler, and I'm actually, instead of trying to count the colour, because it's quite dark through that clear part of the ruler, I'm actually going to use pins. So I'm just going to mark them out as per where I need to put them on the tension square. So nowadays you tend to have tension squares to 10 centimetres or 4 inches, but back then they tended to do it over 1 inch. And back when these patterns were written, it was like over 1 inch, or it was inches. I don't think we had the metric system then. So it's basically the same for the rows. I need 5.5 stitches and 6 3/4 rows to 1 square inch on this tension square. So first of all, I've pinned just at the 1 inch for counting the stitches, which I found up were 5.5 stitches. And then I also do the same for the rows, and I also found I had 6 3/4 inch rows. So I knew that when I knit the garment, it should knit correctly to the tension, to the size, to the 34 inch bust. And like I said, it helped having the original wool to know that as well, which I happened just to knit to the same tension, which was good. But my overall tension square I did at 30 stitches and 30 rows, just to give enough coverage so it didn't curl at the ends or anything when measuring. And I'm just doing a close-up shot here where you can see the rows and then counting. So when I cast on for this project, I use a cable cast on. So you can just see I've done a slip stitch, and then I've just done the one stitch as if you would to cast on, and then, but instead of going like the way I just cast on at the beginning, I put the needle through in between the stitches. So I'll show you again. So I just get my needle, the tip, I pop it through, and it just goes through the other end. And that's what's known as a cable cast on, which gives quite a nice cable edge. The pattern doesn't tell you which way to cast on, it just says cast on. A lot of knitters have their own preferences for cast on. This is one of mine, and I also find it gives quite a good stretch to the kind of rib design or pattern that I'm going to be knitting. I find it's a really good sort of semi-stretchy cast on, which I find really helpful and good. And then I use this Knit Counter Lite app on my phone for when I'm counting my stitches and recording them. What I really like about it is there's a space to put a picture of your pattern, so you know what you're working on, and a title, and then I can add and remove rows and decrease rows like I'm doing here. I'm working through the pattern, and also what needle size I'm working on a particular section, because this particular pattern has different needles, so I know where I am. And I just find it super helpful for me. I just find it convenient on my phone to do that. I know some people like to handwrite them notes, but yeah, I just find it keeps it all nicely recorded for me on my phone whilst I'm working through it. So I'm just knitting the first row of the pattern now, which is purl 2, knit 4 to the last 2 stitches where you purl 2 again, so you've got the nice even stitches for joining at the ends on the purl 2s. So I'm just working through that row now. and it's quite a nice yarn to knit with, and also because it is bigger, it's going to knit up quicker too, which is really good. It's not a fine yarn. It does feel quite nice on the hands to knit with. That's good that it's good to knit with, because some yarns can be really scratchy on the hands, and yeah, this one isn't, so that's good. And then I'm on the second row, it is knit 2, purl 4 until the end, then it's a knit 2 again. So I'm currently knitting this on the number 3mm needles, which would have been number 11 old UK knitting needles. So it's a smaller needle out the 2 needles that I'm currently doing the pattern on, or knitting the pattern on. And then it says in the pattern to do that until the work measure is 1.5 inches, as you saw with the tape measure there. And then I need to change over to the 3.75mm needles. So I'm just going to do that now. It's still continuing in the same pattern as I've been doing. And what you find is basically the smaller needle will bring the bottom edge of the garment sort of in when you're wearing it. It just makes it slightly smaller, and then it just widens it a bit. It's almost like the border. And then I just knit from the 3mm needle into the 3.75mm needles, and then I just continue knitting this particular pattern until the end. So there'll be like armhole shaping, and then just dividing for the neck and everything. So and casting off at the shoulders, and I will just literally continue through until I've finished off each part of the front and back as per the knitting instructions. So here I am with Daisy doing some knitting. Daisy's my dog, and she likes to sit with me sometimes when I knit. Hello, Daisy. Now Daisy's having a rest. So my style of knitting is the English style method that I use, where you throw the yarn over the needle, as you can see here. When I was taught to knit by my great auntie and my nan, between them both teaching me, this is the style they taught me, which was, I believe a lot of people in England were taught to knit this way. I briefly remember also knitting at school as well as a child, and this again was the way the teachers held the needles when showing us how to knit, although I was already knitting that way, like I said, because I was knitting prior to that at home with my great auntie and my nan. There are other forms of how you can hold the needles, but for me personally, I just like to knit this way. I find it super quick for me and natural, and I'm so used to using circular needles now. Initially when I used to knit, it was on long needles, and it took some getting used to using a smaller needle on my hands that wasn't sort of straight across them on a long needle. Now it just feels really natural to knit this way, and yeah, it's the way I like to knit when I'm doing my knitting. I find the repetitive motion of the stitches so relaxing when I'm knitting. I knit fairly fast, I believe. If you can see, this hasn't been speeded up. This is actual video footage of how I knit. But yeah, I find it so relaxing. It's just something I can just get into the zone of, and I could, before I know it, sometimes hours can whiz by when I'm knitting. It's just so relaxing, and that's why I think I just love knitting so much. And I also like being able to make something that I can wear at the end of it, which is really great. So once I've knitted the front and the back of the top, I just need to do the seaming and the finishing of the final roll neck. So what I'm doing first is I'm just going to weave in all loose ends of the knitting, and I just use a special sewing needle for knitting with a wide hole and a blunt tip that's good for going through wool, and then I just snip off the excess there. And then you can see there's the armholes here, and this is the back of the knitting, and I've just put some neck stitches onto a stitch holder, as you can see here, And then we've also got the front. So again, we've got the armhole shaping and the shoulder shaping. And then these are the stitches on the neck front on the holder. And also, as you can see, there's a slightly lower decrease on the neck edge in here that's longer than it is on the back, which is quite common in a lot of round neck kind of garments that are knitted. And now this is the shoulder shaping, which is the same on both sides, on the front and back. And first of all, the instructions, the pattern instructions tell me to join both the shoulders on each side, as you can see here. So what I tend to do is just pin them together just to get the rib matching. So when I seam it together, it's going to all look joined best it can, you know, once it's sewn together. I'm just going to add some pins here, and then I'm going to use this needle again, and it's the same yarn I use for knitting, which keeps it all together really well, that you just use in the actual sewing part as well. So I'm just weaving through a few stitches. I don't tie a direct knot into it. I tend to go through with some wool first, and then I just tie a couple of little like knots near it. It just gives it a neater finish without a bulky end of a knot, so to speak, just joined in to the knitting. So I tie that in a couple of times on the knots, and then I just start to join the knitting, as you can see here. And I use a mattress stitch for the join. So basically I just weave the needle through each stitch on each side that matches, so you should get a neat join up the shoulders once that's done. So I just continue to put my needle through. The reason we're joining the shoulder seams first is because I'm then going to need to do the armbands on each side to give them a neat finish, to have an edging rather than leaving out the raw knitting as it is. And then after you've finished the armbands, you join the side seams, and then you knit the actual roll neck parts, and then the top is finished. So I'm just going to continue with mattress stitch along here until I get to the end. And as you can see, the sort of rib joins are matching each side like nicely. And I just double knot it. I tend to double knot it just here personally, it's what I do, as you can see. And then I just weave into the seam of the join once I've done these knots. I just weave the loose end of the yarn back into the join I've just made, or the seam, and just neatly tuck that through there, and then snip off the excess yarn, like I'm doing here. And then I'm just going to do the same for the shoulder the other side. So at the end you'll see they're both all sewn together and seamed, ready for the next part, which is knitting the armhole bands. And this is the underside of the shoulder, so you can see where it's been sewn together there. I'm doing it as per the pattern exactly. So now for the armhole band, it's told me to pick up a total of 76 stitches evenly across the armhole. So I'm just using, again, my circular needle, and I'm using the 3mm knitting needle. The UK size, it would have been a UK 11 needle. And I'm just evenly picking up the stitches. You might have seen at the beginning there, I didn't actually put a knot in. I do one loop, and then I double loop it with both parts of the yarn of each side, and that just secures it for me. And then obviously I weave in the loose ends at the end, and then I just go back to the single yarn and continue to pick up the stitches. As you can see, sometimes I just go through, but I can sometimes, you've just got to make sure you catch the wool, because sometimes you might miss it as you're trying to put your needle through, like you can see here, and it just slips off. So because they're quite fine, shiny pointed tips on these ones of these needles, so you just got to make sure you pull through the stitch each time, just to set your foundation sort of knitting row. And you can see them all here on the needle. And now I'm going to continue, and as you can see, it goes round. When it's finished, it will go round like that for the armhole. So now I'm just going to do a knit 1, purl 1 rib for 6 rows, and it tells me to increase a stitch at each end for every row. And I think that's so it sews, you're going to have to seam it
on the rib bands, so I think it's just so it sits nice within inside the knitting, and also to allow maybe for the shoulder shaping, because it sort of increases up, so it just means the band sits nicely with those increases instead of just one size the whole way around. It would maybe be some tension on it, and you want it to sort of sit nicely on the armholes. And then what I've done after I've done the armhole bands or knitted them, I've just sewn the side seams up as per the pattern told me to do. And then also after that, then it told me to fold over the armhole bands, which I've pinned here. And then it just says to slip stitch into position. So I folded them all neatly around the actual garment. So you'll have this like finishing on the sides that's a neater finish than if it had been just the raw knitting left. And I've done that for both sides there, as you can see. And this is just the wrong side of the work. So now it's right side. I'm just showing you again how that looks. The final thing I now need to do is the roll neck, where I need to pick up some stitches down the neck fronts and knit from the stitch holders and knit around the back ones. I tend to start on the right side of the back and then go knit across the back stitches, then the other back side, then the neck, and then the neck front stitches from the stitch holder, and then up, and I join it in the round, and I put a stitch marker there so I know where my join is when I'm knitting, where my next row starts. And I had to again pick up a total of 76 stitches evenly around the neck, including stitches from the stitch holders. And again, I have to work in rounds of knit 1, purl 1, rib for 6.5 inches on this part. So this is how it looks once it's finished. It's all neatly joined in. It's quite a nice 1 by 1 rib. It also told me to cast off loosely in rib, so it gives a nice amount of stretch here for when it's folded over and goes around the neckline, as you can see. So you can actually get it on and it's not tight. And here is the Mary Quant knitted top that I made. I got to wear during a beach walk with my dog Daisy.
So overall, as you may have seen from the video I just showed you, I'm really pleased with how it's turned out, and it's really interesting wearing it with the original Patons Flair Wool that it's made in, well, part wool and cortel. Yeah, really happy with it. Definitely one I will definitely wear. It's slightly scratchy, I'm used to wearing smoother wools nowadays, like merino, from a lot of my other knitted projects when I'm using modern wool substitutes, or if I use cotton. It's not, I can wear wool, so I'm not feeling like, I think other people that may be more sensitive to wool would be feeling really like this is really scratchy. But to me it feels like if I wore Shetland wool, any sort of like British Fair Isle kind of yarns or wool that 100% wool, it's kind of got that sort of feel to it, but in a more sort of thicker weight. So it's quite thick. The only thing I didn't really notice when I went to make it was because of the way the arms sort of join, you have to knit, as you saw in the video, you have to kind of knit round the arms, and then you slip stitch the wool underneath, or the edging that you knit underneath. It's quite thick, it does leave this quite big kind of band. You can see here, it's quite thick. And I hadn't really noticed that, and I did wonder when I was looking at how it was kind of constructed, it wouldn't lay that flat, because I knew it was quite thick wool, like almost like I said, it's thicker than a double knit. It's more like an Aran weight wool. But then I had another look at the pattern, and actually, although it's white, and I think that's maybe why I didn't notice it, you can maybe see on here, I'm not sure if you can see, this pattern it's quite thick on the sides. On there, but I'm really happy with the length. I knitted it to the exact length because I had the exact amount of wool that was the quantities that the pattern said, which was for the 34-inch bust, it was 12 ounces, and I had 12, so basically 12 balls, and I had 12 balls, so I couldn't really do a lot different to it without running out. And I knew I would have enough. I felt confident I would have enough because I did a tension swatch, as you saw in the beginning of the video. I was confident it would knit to the tension, which meant that the quantity of yarn would suffice, would be enough. And as it turned out, there was literally just a couple of meters of yarn left once I actually finished the whole thing with the roll neck as well. And I actually knitted that to the correct length too. So it sits, you can see the sort of join there, and it sort of just sits nicely through that. So yeah, overall I'm really happy. I love the colour. I think it looks great with these trousers. I think it matches really well, so it's definitely something I will wear in the future. It's a bit warm in summertime here now, but again, on a cooler day, I still think it's something I can potentially wear, although the wool is quite thick, but then you've got the arms that are exposed, so that sort of cools you down a bit, but it is a roll neck. So maybe as I go more of a spring top, or as we go into autumn, late summer, definitely one I can wear. So I'm so pleased with how this project has turned out, and I hope you've enjoyed watching the video and seeing the process of making this pattern. I'm looking forward to uploading some more videos on more knitting things I've been working on as the year progresses, so please feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you've enjoyed this video and would like to see more. And I'm also on Instagram, so I've put a link in the bottom of the description if you're interested in seeing my photos of my work in progress of what I'm knitting. So many exciting patterns to choose from in my collection. Thank you for watching my channel, Knitting-a-GoGo, and like I said, I hope you've enjoyed it, and once again, thank you for watching.